trying to make the soul of the spirit, could you repeat that portion? In summary.
Hebrews 4:12. For the word of God is quick and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the dividing asunder of soul and spirit, and of the joints and marrow, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. If you were to read this passage just in the context of an individual at a moral level, Ellen White might describe it in the following way. Practical truth must be brought into the light, and the word, like a sharp two-edged sword, must cut away the surplus of self that there is in our own characters. So she would apply this passage in a situation where an individual is now going to address self that's contained within them. I'll give you another passage. The word makes the proud humble, the perverse meek and contrite, the disobedient obedient. The sinful habits natural to man are interwoven with the daily practice, but the word cuts away the fleshly lusts. It is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the mind. It divides the joints and marrow, cutting away the lusts of the flesh, making men willing to suffer for their Lord. So she speaks about it in the sense of an individual person. So I want to understand it in that way, but this individual person isn't a literal person, it's a movement. This movement is comprised of two groups in the text. Those who are in the flesh and those who are in the spirit. So if I understand the question correctly, it's dealing with the issue of the ability of this two-edged sword first to penetrate the disguises or otherwise of everybody. It's able to penetrate what you really are, and then it's able to divide. And we understand the work of the gospel is to divide two classes and separate them. The two classes in this context is the soul and the spirit. The soul is a symbol of a human being. I know often we use it in the sense of a living soul, but I'm understanding it if you go and check the root word and drop down to the very root in the Greek, this soul is talking about mortality. So it's able to separate between the mortal and the spiritual, or between the carnal mind and the spiritual mind. And that's what I understand this verse is teaching, that when the little book is eaten by God's people at the end of the world, they become converted. They represent the work of the third angel, and they're able to penetrate whether a person is genuine or not. And not only can they penetrate, they eventually divide the two classes of people. Does that help? Amen.
Because to me, the way you explained it, it sounded like it's the same principle when Christ declared the end of the beginning. I don't know what's the difference between those two. Because unless I'm the one who's not understanding both the concepts, that when Christ declared the end of the beginning, the same things that you see at the end and the same things that you see at the beginning of something.
Yes, I think it's a follow-on to the principle of end from the beginning. Except now within the context of prophetic circuits, we're locating that dynamic within the history of 9/11 to midnight. At least the circuits that we make out will identify 9/11 at midnight. The things you see at 9/11 and things you see at midnight. It is in essence the same thing.
It's the same thing. But only that prophetic circuit applies only from 9/11 to midnight.
Now, you may find circuits that where we see the same dynamic in different places. But the ones the ones I've seen anyway, are located, what we're seeing specifically in 9/11.
So based on the same thing.
Yeah.
First question is going to Elder Pamela. Is justification a point or a period? Second question is going to Odell. I know that I should give you time.
Maybe one at a time. Alright, so the first one is coming.
So, if we were to think of the first set of the third angel's messages in the terms of sin, righteousness and judgment, the sin problem is dealt with in 3 steps. Thoughts from the Mount of Blessings, 7.2. Conviction, penitence, pardon. Pardon is the last step of this progressive work that's been done by the first angel. If we were to think of the first, second and third steps as justification, sanctification and glorification, you could envisage that justification was this process from the beginning, time of the end, to the empowerment 9/11. But the way it's normally described, justification is the work of a moment. So I would say that justification is this momentary time, and I didn't focus on it so much at this series, but often when I would draw a reform line, more often than not beginning at 9/11 to midnight, I draw the first angel here as a point, the second as a period, and then the third down as the period of dividing God, indicating that this point here is marking justification. So at one level you could say that justification is this period or work of the first angel, but really it's the culmination point, it's the third step in the work of the first angel. So I normally understand it to be the work of a moment, justification, this transaction between the sinner who goes down in baptism as a rebel, considered a rebel, and rises up a child of God. Over and over again, the way and the right, and the scriptures teach or portray justification as the point of life.
Question number 2 is going to Odell. Is the letters that is between midnight and midnight going to be that of not having a prophetic or a prophetic message in an era, or is it in the days of Ellen White? Because when you're representing eternity on the line, you say when Ellen White first born, there was a period of darkness, which meant there was no prophetic message that came to the church up to a certain point. Is that the case with us now, or is there an explanation attached to that?
Okay, let me just draw the history. It's she dies 1915, right? And I was saying this is pointing to midnight. And then in 1909, that's the way my people. Then I would say PBM. Then Sister White's death marks the cessation of the prophesying, according to the testimonies from Luke 5, page 77, if I'm not wrong. Sister White was saying, hello? You said what? Okay, ere long, all prophesying among us will be at an end. So she's dead. And then, no longer have a prophet in the history of society. So the question is, the darkness that comes is coming from, that at midnight, we identify darkness at midnight, right? In the sense of it being midnight. It's midnight. So I guess it's on the part of those who are on the wrong side of the issue. They are left in darkness. But to the other side, it's not the same. That's the explanation I don't know if I agree.
I'm trying to follow. Was still on the history that you are bringing in to have a striking similarity. So if I say that was applying to the people who lived after the death of Ellen after a certain period of time, to us it would be selected. Those who would be closed out of the closed darkness, and some would be closed on the other side. What I want to do. What logic are you using to clarify that?
Can I try and answer?
You want to answer?
Yes. When you read the book of Exodus, and when Christ was going to Mount Gethsemane, he left the two disciples, they were disciples which he was going with them. Christ began to be silent when he was going to the Mount of Gethsemane before they cried him. It was a strange thing to the disciples when he was going to them. So this is typifying the midnight when Christ is no longer speaking to his disciples. At that time, when Christ was going to the Mount of Gethsemane, when he was going to him, to the experience of fitness, of the root of sin, he started to be silent. And it was strange to the disciples. It was the first time he did this. So at midnight, we see, as Brother Obey was sharing, we see the word of God no longer. Yes, I can say so. What I'm trying to say, what I'm trying to explain is that Christ, within the chain, when he was going to Mount Gethsemane, he started to be silent to his disciples. And the disciples, it was strange to them what Christ did. When you read about the story of midnight, the execution of Christ, he started to be silent.
Does that make sense? Okay, so I think the answer that is being provided to your question is you're trying to understand what's the nature of the darkness between midnight and midnight. And I think the answer Obey is giving is the darkness at midnight is for those who essentially come to that famous foolish virgins. Right? They left without light at that point, they're in midnight darkness. I guess that's his response. And my brother was providing a line of thought to suggest that Christ's experience in Gethsemane was the binding law. He was silent, and he's going on a passage from Desire of Ages where it identifies, the strange development that was that the disciples saw in Gethsemane, that Christ was silent in that time. So I think he's making the connection with the silence of the prophesying after midnight in the Bible. Does that make sense? BK has his hand up vigorously. I think he wants to answer the point, and then maybe we can
No,
move
it's
on.
a different question. I have a question. I'm not answering him. I have a question.
If it's a question, Russell had his hand up first. So let's have Russell, then we'll come to you.
There is a third question.
Oh, third question. Okay.
My third question is coming to you. Is unification Islamic rules taking place before Russia fled USA?
Does the caliphate coming together take place before Rabbia, which is a midnight? Yes. We see it beginning from the prediction before midnight to midnight. Now, you're going to have to take my word for it, because I'm not going to establish that. It's a study that we've been looking at on the trumpets of Revelation, and through that study, essentially there's a document that is about to be published on it, so it will come to your attention at some point. But through that study, it signifying that the caliphate, we see it clearly at midnight based on the lines that we laid out here. But that work, because it doesn't, you don't wake up one day and there's a caliphate, it's a progressive development. Does it begin at midnight or does it end at midnight? Or rather, is it fully established at midnight or does it begin to be established at midnight? And one understanding that its establishment begins at midnight, by the time it comes to midnight, it's fully established. But I'll direct you to the document on the trumpet, the very study of the trumpet starting to be released to establish that point of view. Does that make sense? All right. Russell and BK.
Okay, my question is directed actually to the Sister Doreen. In relation to the point when you mentioned, when you're taking us through physiology, there's a point that you mentioned that if you practice incontinence, you're going to lose certain vital elements in your body, i.e. zinc. Okay, so my question is it those elements that you lose, okay, and in particular zinc, okay, is it replaceable? And if it is replaceable, how long does it take? Okay, if not, what does that spell for someone who is in that predicament?
Yeah, zinc is one of the elements that's spent, and zinc takes 1 week to recover. The diet, if you're just having a normal diet, it takes a week to recover.
Again, does it like fully recover?
Yeah. However, if obviously you're thinking about a space of a month, then you need to try and limit yourself to that duration. Otherwise, you become chronically zinc deficient over a prolonged period of time. Because you need to be able to replace completely what you've spent. So taking the time consideration, how long it takes for zinc to recover, then you need to work out your timetable so that you don't eventually, gradually become zinc deficient.
So in essence, all the problems that may have occurred in a body, maybe due to ignorance or whatever it may be, they can be corrected if you take the correct measures, and then you can begin to follow the correct pattern.
Yeah, and you can find foods that are rich in zinc. It's not the only one, calcium as well, and other minerals.
Okay. Okay.
My question is directed to Elder Paminda. Not directly linked to the presentation that you made, but because you mentioned something about 144,000, and I understand that this wasn't the point that you're making. But when you talk about 144,000, that number, is it symbolic or is it literal? Because I have suspicion that we probably have different views in this room at least. What is the standing of the movement on this issue?
As a frontline speaker who represents this movement, what's your position?
I didn't hear it.
You didn't hear?
No.
As a frontline speaker that represents this movement on this continent, what's your position on this?
My position is symbolic.
I tend to agree. I don't think this movement has got a firm position as a statement of faith that the 144,000 is literal or symbolic. People have been left to make their own conclusions on that subject. It may be further on down the line we have much more clarity on the subject, but people have divergent views. from my interaction with people, the vast majority of speakers and rank and file members believe it to be literal. So, thank you very much for that question. Over to you.
Alright, so, Bakam, you have your answer?
Sorry?
Do you have your answer?
No.
You want reasons now? Or
People are wondering.
I think they should wonder about the present truth message of the priests, not the 144,000. We don't even know today who comprises the 144,000. All we know that they're made up from amongst ourselves. I don't think we have enough clarity. I certainly don't have enough clarity on who they are. I have some ideas of how they're formed, but I don't think that number is at the moment being made up. I will say one thing. In my opinion, when we speak about the Church Triumphant, some people conflate the idea of the Church Triumphant to mean the 144,000. And I don't believe that's correct. If you can demonstrate quite conclusively that the Church Triumphant is not the 144,000. The 144,000 are part of the Church Triumphant, but they're not the Church Triumphant. Things that I understand about the 144,000, they're only made up of Seventh-day Adventists. They're the people who will be alive at the end of the world that will be translated. Most Adventists who successfully pass the mark of the beast test, which is priests and Levites, will be martyred. We don't know the numbers, but if you take the dialogue between Elijah and God, he thinks, being a priest, which he is, that he's the only one standing, and God says there's 7,000. So if that's any kind of ratio to go by, the Levites will far outnumber the priests by a large margin. So most of these people, as well as all the 11th hour workers, will be martyred. The bloodshed will be enormous, far surpassing what I think we can imagine. These few people who have been selected by God, who have been found fit, not just faithful, but fit to go through that process, will compose the 144,000. We've all read the passage that describe who they are and their experience and how the number is calculated. It's 12,000 from 12 tribes, which gives you this number of 144,000. We understand that the 12 tribes are symbolic of an experience. We understand that the number 12,000, the 12 tribes that is, and the number 12,000 is also symbolic, because the tribes themselves are symbolic. So you have a symbolic number multiplied by a symbolic number to come up to the 144,000. So that's why I'm of the opinion that it's a symbolic number. But let every man be persuaded in his own mind. I don't think it's a testing truth at this moment. People have, as I say, their own thoughts and ideas.
My question is directed to Elder Command, but it's not a question. I need an explanation from what you have said about the former reign and the latter reign, of which you said that it ended in 2014 and the finishing of the investigative judgment.
Did I say that?
Yes, I've read that.
I don't recall saying that. I'm saying that, you think I'm saying that 2014 is the end of the investigative judgment?
Yeah, you can explain what you're saying, what you're trying to say, just share it today.
So if anybody else heard me say that, either I said something incorrect or I was misheard. Let me just read one statement. 6th Bible Commentary, 1071.8. This is from my brother. 6 BC 1071.8. Justification is the full and complete pardon of sin. The moment a sinner accepts Christ by faith, that moment he is pardoned. So that's my understanding. 6 BC 107.8 of why justification is a moment and not a period. Could you repeat your question? Is it a two-part question or a one-part question?
It is a two-fold question. You've mentioned the former rain. Actually, I need a clarity that you've mentioned the former rain that it's end prior latter rain. Then we are in the latter rain now. And my second question is that the finishing of the investigative judgment. I need a clarity there.
Can you repeat your first question?
My question is when does the former rain its end?
Former rain's end, I believe, in 2014.
Okay, so clear as why?
What? Okay, I can't go through a complete study on it because it would take all of our Q&A. We understand from Daniel chapter 5, there's the handwriting on the wall, mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. We can understand that writing on the wall in a number of different ways, in a number of different contexts. We can understand the symbology of who Belshazzar represents in a number of different ways. We can understand him to mean the leadership of this church, the Adventist church. We also understand him to represent the foolish virgins of this movement. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin is a mathematical calculation that's addressing the issue of coinage or weights. And if everybody understands that, if you go back into the original Hebrew, you can work out how much each of these words represents in weight or money value. So, mene is 50 shekels. You have 2 menes. Then, mene, mene, tekel. A tekel is another word for a shekel, which is 1 shekel. And upharsin means to divide or cut in half, which is half a mene. So you have 25 shekels. If you add all of these together, you get 126 shekels. The Bible teaches us that there are 20 gira in a shekel, as there are 100 cents in a dollar. Just a subdivision of a shekel. And if we time this by 20 gira, is AH, you get 2520. And if you connect this to Daniel chapter 4, the punishment that comes upon Nebuchadnezzar, which is a 7 times punishment or a 2520, you can see the connection between the two chapters. And part of the problem in chapter 5 is that Daniel, when he comes to explain what the writing on the wall is, he accuses of Belshazzar of understanding the punishment and the crime that his grandfather entered into. So his grandfather becomes the warning message for Belshazzar. So we can think of this in a really simple way. If we had chapter 4 and chapter 5, chapter 4 would be the first angel's message. Then chapter 5 would be the second, ending in the third step, or judgment, the death of Belshazzar. So in that framework, mene, mene, tekel, upharsin, or the 2520, becomes a symbol of the second angel's message. So we can understand it that way. So this issue of the 126, I'm saying, is connected to the second angel. So that's the original, that's the premise that we're going to go down. So we know that the second angel had his ministry from 9/11 to midnight. So I'm saying, mene, mene, tekel, upharsin, this history of Daniel 5 can be plugged into the history from 9/11 to midnight. We went to the period of 1888, we could step back 2 years or 2 steps back. We'd go to 1884 and 1886. Brother Obay's already dealt with 1884. 1884 and the few years preceding this, there's rejection of the ministry of Ellen White, which is, I think he's explained this, why her open vision stopped in 1884. Because primarily the leadership have rejected her ministry. And the rejection of the ministry looks like this. They begin to question her inspiration. In essence, they tell her to stop meddling in their private affairs, making their private affairs public to the church. They want to erroneously use this idea of Matthew 18, where if you've got a problem with your brother, you go and deal with him directly. But Ellen White says no. Public problems have to be dealt with publicly, and they are going to attack her now, discredit her ministry, and so she's going to, in response, stop open visions. So from this point onwards, she has only closed visions. But there's a nice statement that she makes here. She says, today, in 1884, there are men who are understanding, presenting the third angel's message using William Miller's rules. So William Miller's rules are being used here in 1884 to promulgate and teach the third angel's message. She's referring to Wagner and Jones. I'm suggesting that this is the time of the end. 1886, she now makes another thrust at these leaders. She says, if God were to send a messenger with a message to you, similar to the message that he sent to Nineveh, what would this church do? What she's saying is that the Lord has already raised up that messenger, about to come in 2 years, and what are you going to do when he confronts you? We understand who that messenger is. It's the teamwork of Wagner and Jones. And I'm suggesting this is the increase of knowledge and the formalization of the message. So these 2 steps lead you up to 1888. Ellen White's clear that 1888, the angel of Revelation 18 came to empower the third angel's message. And she marks that as the outpouring of the latter rain. She says this event was designed to be a warning of the close of probation, or this event here. The great test, she calls it. So 1888 was a warning that the great test is about to happen. This is one of our primary logics that we use to identify that the latter rain precedes the test, which is what we spoke about earlier. This test is the Sunday law. For whatever reason, this history prematurely comes to its end, and this history is now going to be repeated. So all I want us to pick up is that the latter rain comes in 1888, and it's Revelation 18 angel coming down. She identifies this. So I'm going to pick up this event here, which has all the characteristics of 9/11, the outpouring of the latter rain, the Holy Spirit, and go into the future 126 years. Because the 2520 becomes a symbol of not only a covenant that's been entered into, but also a covenant that's rejected, or rebellion. Ellen White here calls the leaders who rejected these warnings and the ministry and the work of these 2 men. She identifies them as Korah, Dathan and Abiram, the rebels. So if you go 126 years into the future, it takes you to the year 2014. So what I'm saying is that 1888, marking the latter rain, is the identification of Korah, Dathan and Abiram, who are leaders in the church. And it marks a clear, distinct separation between who they are and who the messengers of the covenant are. And the messengers of the covenant is Christ. These are the messengers who prepare the way. But these messengers, who have been symbolized by Caleb and Joshua, now are the official leaders of the church. And they're commissioned to do this work. They bypass the conference structure. The 2 men, and the spirit of prophecy, and they go directly to the congregations, which is what we do. We bypass the conference structure, we go directly to the congregations to teach them this message, because the ecclesiastical authorities are rejecting this truth. So, if we take all the characteristics of 1888, bring them to 2014, we already understand that Revelation 18:8 came down at 9/11, but 9/11 has all the characteristics of 2014. If we were to go back on a larger scale, we know that in the time period of Ephesus at the beginning of the church, we have Pentecost, and Ellen White calls that the former rain, preceding the destruction of Jerusalem, the great test. The end of the world, we have the latter rain. Again, the latter rain is poured out before the great test, destruction of this church, Sunday law. So, when we mark the former rain here at Pentecost, that precedes the destruction of Jerusalem, we mark the latter rain as occurring at 9/11, preceding the great test, which mirrors the great test or the destruction of Jerusalem. So that's why we say the latter rain fell at 9/11. That's the logic that we use for that. But all the characteristics of 9/11 can be identified in 2014. There's a separation that happens at 9/11 between this movement and the church. There's a separation that occurs in our movement between the foolish virgins and the wise virgins. Occurs here at 2014. So this is why I'm marking the latter rain here. If you go into the Bible, let me see if I can find the Bible word for you. We go to Ezekiel 45 verse 12. Ezekiel 45 verse 12. Now you see me show that meaning farsin, the meaning is composed of 50 shekels. And to identify there's 50 shekels, you need to go into the original, and it tells you that there clearly. If you were to do a word study, I'll tell you what it says in Brown Driver Briggs, which is a lexicon similar to Strong's. It says a weight or measurement usually 50 shekels, but it may be 60 shekels. So we go to Ezekiel 45 verse 12, and the shekel which shall be 20 gerah. That's this, I said here, 1 shekel is 20 gerah, so that's the passage for that one. It says 20 shekels, 5 and 20 shekels, 15 shekels shall be your mina or manna or meaning. If you add up 20, 5 and 20 and 15, what do you get? $20 plus 25 plus 15. 60. You get 60. So I've said it's 50. So I chose to use 50, not 60. Yeah? So let's do 60 instead. So you do 60 shekels, 1 shekel, and 30 shekels. If you add them all up, it comes to 151. Yep? 151 shekels. Now remember, this imagery here is the 126, 20 gerah, 2520. So let's look at this 151. When did the great apostasy begin to occur in our church, in our movement? You can trace it all the way back when you consider the 2520. You begin the 2520 where? 742 BC. 723, 677, 1798, 1844, and 1863. If you put a line here, I'm not sure if everybody knows the word chiasm or chiastic structure, or at least you know the word a mirror. So if you could get this and fold it in half, it would be a mirror. If you work out the time span between all of these histories, between these 2 days, is 65 years. Between these two dates is 65 years. Between these is 46. Between these is 46. And between these is 19. Between these, 19. You get a perfect chiasm. So the 2520 story begins here in Isaiah 7, and you takes you all the way to 1863. What happens in 1863? Our church rejects the 2520. So when it rejects the 2520, it's going to receive a punishment of a 7-time scattering that's identified in William Miller's second dream. You all familiar with that? Yep. So the rejection of the covenant is here. I'm saying when the latter rain occurs, God is going to finally select his faithful priests, because the wheat and the tares are going to begin to be separated. So let's count from 1863, 151 years. Mini till you're passing. Do the calculation, it takes you to 2014. So we have two witnesses for 2014 with identification of the re-entry into the covenant after rejection of the 2520. It's 126 years from 1888, which is marking the latter rain. So we have witnesses here for 2014. 2014 was an important year in the world and in this movement. So we'll mark a couple of things. First of all, in 2014, this movement had its first major split. There are a group of ministries that come together, and one of the ministries, Path to Just Ministries, and associated ministries with them, separated from this movement in 2014. At the same time that we were given the light of Ezra 7. Ezra 7 is the midnight cry message. So we have a large separation. The message of the midnight cry begins to be given, Ezra 7. And also, Brother Tabos has spoken about the caliphate that's going to be formed, predicted before midnight. As a harbinger to that, a caliphate is pronounced or announced by ISIS the same month that separation occurs. Ezra 7 is given to God's people at camp meeting in the same month that ISIS identifies itself and declares itself a caliphate. The same year, 2014, Russia annexes the Crimea. So Russia begins to make maneuvers, begins to exert its authority on the world stage. A year later, it begins to be involved and embroils itself in the Syrian conflict. So 2014 is an important year in this movement. It's the separation between what I'm going to identify as the foundational messages to the midnight cry message. It's where we have the identification or the separation of a large number of our movement. Separation of the wheat and tares. And it's where the test begins for the leadership of this movement. Let me rephrase what that means. Leadership of this movement means everybody. Everybody's going to be tested as they begin to understand what the proxy war is in Syria and what impact it has upon us. 2014, we weren't really understanding what was going on, but this light that's begun to be shed upon us, that rain, begins to unfold, and we begin to understand that this proxy war that's going on there is the midnight cry message, if I can express it that way, because it leads us to Raphia. So there's more that we can say about 2014, but that's the rationale of why I'm saying 2014 is the transition from the former to the latter rain.
Do you have time for question?
15 minutes. 15 minutes.
I think the one is the time.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So what we did is like quarter past, which is 3 minutes from now.
Which is how?
3 minutes.
Does someone have a quick question? Last question.
I want to ask this
to,
Yeah, I will give it to everyone. Can anyone enter into heaven without the name, the seal of the Lord in their forehead? Or anyone? Can anyone enter the heaven or the who was present without the seal of the Lord?
Did anybody?
but you mentioned your name first.
The question is,
I must maybe private or what? I don't tell you. Because the brother is one of the ministers in African constitution. To also clarify from the list concerning the symbol of the 44,000, I would really love to hear. I would love to really. Because I think I've been through this Lord with other people. Symbol it was a puzzle. Right? So now if it's ready, I will ask him. Because he already said it. He's believing that this is symbol. So Shalmi is already strong there. I'm hoping he can share the step.
The thing is, the 144,000, you see, that's a kind of word. There's no way that's going to be a short discussion.
Okay, yeah, I'm saying maybe private.
Okay.
I'm still available to sign. But this one.
On the seal of God.
so the question is, can anybody enter into heaven without the seal of God?
Yeah, without the seal of God. Because we understand that the seal of God is the character of Christ the Son. So can anyone enter there without it?
I don't believe they can, no.
Okay, so now what is saying, 144,000 are having the seal of the Lord in their foreheads. And mark them being saved, which they are compromised, they are made of the priest and the Levites. So can we make clarity of that?
I agree with you.
Yes.
They're composed of the priests and Levites, and they receive the seal of God.
So one of our teachers are sure it comes, what can we do after Sunday?
They receive the seal of God because the seal of God is, in that history, their acceptance of the Sabbath message, the Sabbath test. They pass the test, they receive the seal of God. But they're martyred in that history.
So in the mountain, 144,000 is still in the seal of God.
Right.
In the mountain, 444,000 are standing in Christ, in the mountain, living the lake, which is the seal of the Lord. And those who have the seal of the Lord are marked as the one who will be partaking in the things with Christ. So even under the 11-hour workers, where are we putting the ministry? Because now the number of the seal will not but if their number 144,000 seals made up to two sides, priests and Levites, what happens with them, like the 11-hour workers? If they are going to the double die, they are all to go to die.
I have no idea about numbers, but there's 18 million Adventists. If there's 5,000 priests and there's 1 million Levites, and if there were 144,000 little people at the end, the 144,000, say if it was literal, if it was, what's going to happen to 850,000 Levites? What happened to the rest of these Levites if there were 1 million of them?
If they are not faithful,
No, if they're faithful. If they're faithful, what will happen to them?
yeah, they will not just
They will be martyred. When will they be martyred? They'll be martyred in the Sunday law history because they have to pass the mark of the beast test.
I'm hoping you are trying to make me clear on this point.
So do I. So these 850,000 people are going to be martyred in the Sunday law period after they pass the Sunday law test. You agree with that? They're going to be preaching to the world. Those people in the world who accept this message will enter in to the church triumphant. And they too will be martyred. So when they enter into the church of God, they will receive the seal. The same seal that the priests receive, and the same seal that the Levites receive. So they all receive the same seal. The difference between the 144,000 and everybody else is that the others have died, and the 144,000 44,000 haven't died. That's the only distinguishing feature between them. Not that one receives the seal and the other does not. They both receive the seal. That's the priests received the seal who died. The Levites received the seal who died. The 11th hour workers received the seal who died. The remaining priests and Levites who don't die also received the seal.
So what about meaning that all the
All the 11th hour workers died.
all,
All. Because they're not they're not virgins.
so they all die.
After they've been sealed.
After still they say they die. That's what they say.
Martyrdom. Not natural deaths.
We're out of time.
Is that new to you, what I've just said?
Now we're discussing it.
We're out of time. It would have been great to have the evidence for taking that time. We'll close the word.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for the question and answer session that you have given us. Thank you, Lord, for the prophecy school that we've been privileged to be part of and to participate and to study the word, hoping that we might show ourselves approved. Merciful Savior, we thank you for the wonderful time that you have given us. We thank you, Lord, as we're in the time period of the latter rain, that it might not be falling on the hearts all around us, and we not to receive it. But I pray, Lord, that we might be receiving it personally. Thank you, merciful Savior, for giving us the aptitude to endure the lessons. Now, Lord, as we end this section, we continuously ask for divine mercy and for guidance. This is our humble prayer. In Christ's name, Amen.